It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where everything feels still, like the world is holding its breath. I was curled up on the couch with a book I wasn't really reading, just flipping through the pages while the scent of garlic and rosemary drifted in from the kitchen where Ryan was cooking dinner. The hum of the oven, the occasional clatter of a pan, the low music playing in the background, it all painted the illusion of a perfect, peaceful evening. And then his phone lit up on the coffee table. It was subtle, just a small buzz and a soft glow from the screen, but my eyes flicked to it automatically. The preview of the message appeared at the top. 3 words. I miss you. My stomach tightened. It wasn't from me. The name on the screen said Tessa. Next to it, a red heart emoji. I just stared at it for a moment, frozen, my pulse quickening. For a second, I almost convinced myself it was innocent, that maybe it was some misunderstanding or maybe even a message meant for someone else. But I already knew better. Ryan had left his phone face up, something he rarely did. And the fact that it buzzed when he wasn't holding it, when he wasn't even in the room, made me feel like it was a window I wasn't supposed to look through, one that had just cracked open enough for me to see the truth. I reached for it. My fingers hesitated for half a second before they wrapped around the device. I knew his passcode. He never changed it. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure he'd hear it from the kitchen. The phone unlocked, and I opened the message thread with Tessa. My breath caught in my throat as I scrolled up. There they were, dozens of messages. Flirty, intimate, and unmistakably romantic. There were no nudes or anything explicit, but the words alone were worse than anything I could have imagined. I miss your touch. When can I see you again? Last night was amazing. I read each line slowly, as if somehow they would make more sense that way, as if maybe I'd find something that would excuse what I was seeing. But there was no mistaking it. No denying it. My husband was having an affair. There were messages about when they'd meet again. A string of heart emojis. Inside jokes that I didn't understand. Complaints about me. I saw my name once. He told her I'd been distant lately. That things hadn't felt the same between us. That he felt more alive when he was with her. I was still, utterly silent, the phone cold and heavy in my hand as I read the words that dismantled everything I thought I knew. I felt something hollow open up in my chest, like a trapdoor had dropped out beneath me and I was just falling into some dark, numb place. I heard Ryan humming softly in the kitchen, stirring something, completely unaware that the reality he'd constructed was unraveling in my hands. I kept reading, not because I wanted to hurt myself further, but because I needed to know the full extent of the betrayal. How long had it been going on? When it started? How deep it ran? There were messages dating back months. It wasn't new. It wasn't a mistake. It was a full-blown second relationship, unfolding right alongside our marriage. There were days where he texted her right after kissing me. Goodbye. Nights when he said he was working late, but instead he was meeting her. Birthdays. Weekends. Normal days. They were all touched by this hidden thread running behind my back. I remembered times when I had kissed him goodnight, told him I loved him, made him coffee in the mornings, all while he was already emotionally elsewhere. With her. I should have screamed. I should have marched into the kitchen and thrown the phone at him, demanded an explanation, shattered the facade with one breath. But instead, I just sat there, the screen lighting up again and again with more messages. More proof. Another I miss you. Another I can't stop thinking about last night. I didn't cry, not yet. I felt like crying belonged to a different version of me, one that hadn't seen what I had just seen. Everything in the room felt too quiet now. The soft clinks of the spoon against the saucepan, the low music still playing, the muted sunset filtering through the blinds, all of it felt like part of a life I no longer lived in. My reality had shifted completely, and Ryan was still humming like everything was fine. I wanted to scream at him to stop. To tell him that everything was not fine. That I knew. That I had seen everything. But I didn't. I set the phone back down exactly where it was. Face up, like I hadn't touched it. My hands were trembling slightly. My eyes were dry but burning. I leaned back into the couch, the book forgotten on my lap, and just stared at the wall while he plated our dinner behind me, oblivious. Oblivious to the fact that in the time it took to finish one text conversation, the entire foundation of our marriage had cracked apart beneath us. We had what most people would probably call a perfect life, or at least that's what it looked like from the outside. A small, charming home just outside Portland with a little garden I tended to on the weekends, cozy string lights on the patio, and that smell of cedar and rain that somehow made everything feel calm even on the hardest days. Ryan and I had been married for 5 years, and anyone who saw us together, we were that couple, the ones who always showed up to parties hand in hand, laughed at inside jokes, made matching playlists for road trips, and sent each other photos of dogs we passed on the street. He worked in medical sales, always on the go but good at what he did, and I worked in project logistics at a boutique furniture company downtown. My job wasn't glamorous, but I liked it. I liked my team. I liked being able to build something, organize chaos into order, take scattered timelines and bring them into alignment. That same part of me thought I was doing the same in my marriage, managing, adjusting, smoothing over the rough patches. The truth was, I never thought I'd be the type of person to get blindsided. I'm not naive, and I pay attention. I notice things. I catch patterns. So when the changes started, I felt them before I really saw them. At first, it was just small shifts. A little more time at the gym, which I told myself was healthy. Everyone needs something for themselves, right? Then the phone started showing up in the bathroom more often, face down on the nightstand every night, always on silent. I used to tease him about how loud his message notifications were at dinner, but now the silence felt heavier than the noise ever had. He started staying late at work more often, saying he had meetings that ran long or clients who needed extra attention. I knew his job could be demanding, he had long drives, networking dinners, product demos. But something about the way he said it felt practiced, like a line he'd rehearsed just enough to sound tired but not suspicious. He got more careful about his clothes too. Started ironing his shirts more often, getting haircuts a little more frequently, switching up his cologne. He said he was just trying to stay sharp, that he was competing with younger guys in the industry. I told myself that made sense. I wanted to believe him because the alternative felt like ripping open a wound I wasn't ready to deal with. I clung to the routines we still had. Our Sunday mornings at the farmer's market. Our quiet dinners where we talked about nothing in particular. The way he'd sometimes reach across the couch and absent-mindedly squeeze my ankle while watching TV. But those moments started to feel hollow. Like echoes of something real, not the real thing. I would lie in bed next to him and feel a distance that wasn't there before. He'd fall asleep so quickly, like none of it weighed on him, while I would stare at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. I started going over everything in my head at night, the receipts, the timing, the way his phone was suddenly always out of reach when I walked into a room. There was a growing heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. A sense that I was walking around in a life that looked perfect, but underneath, something was rotting. I remember this one moment that still sticks with me, one evening in late spring when we had friends over for a backyard barbecue. Everything was beautiful. The fire pit was going, the drinks were flowing, everyone was laughing and telling stories. Ryan had his arms slung over my shoulders, and for a second I let myself believe we were okay. But then his phone buzzed, and I saw the way his eyes flicked to it and his expression changed, just slightly, like a shadow passing over his face. He didn't check it, not in front of everyone, but I knew in that moment that whoever had sent that message mattered more than he wanted to admit. I saw it. And I felt it. After that, I started noticing even more. He was less present. His answers to questions were shorter, vaguer. If I asked how his day went, he'd say fine and change the subject. If I pressed, he'd get irritated, saying I was interrogating him. We started going to bed at different times. He'd stay up late watching something on his laptop, headphones in, while I lay alone in the dark pretending not to care. Our texts during the day went from playful and warm to mechanical and sparse. He stopped saying good morning. He stopped saying I love you before hanging up. But he never outright changed enough for me to have proof. It was always just enough to make me doubt myself. Just enough to convince me that maybe I was being paranoid, or overthinking, or creating problems where there weren't any. The most insidious part was that I still loved him. I still looked at him and remembered our wedding day, the vows we wrote ourselves, the night we got caught in the rain in Seaside and danced barefoot in the parking lot of a closed ice cream shop. I remembered the way he cried when we lost our first pregnancy. I remembered the nights we stayed up late talking about our future, our someday house, our someday kids, our someday everything. I didn't want to believe he could take all that and gamble it for someone else. I didn't want to believe I could be so wrong about the person I married. But denial is a comfortable place to live, especially when the truth is so much colder. So I stayed there longer than I should have. I told myself it was work stress. That maybe he was going through something he didn't know how to talk about. That maybe he was depressed, or exhausted, or feeling lost. I tried to be supportive. I tried to show up. I did the little things, packed his lunch, left him notes, bought his favorite beer. And when none of it seemed to matter, I still kept trying, because I didn't want to believe that love could just dissolve like that. That you could share a bed with someone every night and still not see them slipping away. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was slowly shrinking myself to hold together a life that had already cracked down the middle. I was twisting myself into knots, explaining away things I should have questioned, forgiving silences I should have challenged, ignoring gut feelings I should have trusted. And the worst part was that I still smiled in photos. I still showed up to family dinners. I still introduced him as my amazing husband and laughed when people said we were couple goals. I had built my life on the idea that we were solid. That we were safe. That no matter what happened, we'd weather it together. But I was wrong. So incredibly, painfully wrong. I don't know what I expected to find when I opened that message thread, but it wasn't this. It wasn't months and months of texts that read like a playbook for deceit, for emotional betrayal, for the quiet unraveling of everything I thought we'd built. The chat between Ryan and Tessa wasn't just casual flirting or suggestive jokes that could be brushed off, it was intimate, layered, deliberate. There were photos, jokes, references to nights they'd spent together, and worse, things they'd said about me behind my back. She was 24. Tessa. She worked in Ryan's office, medical sales, same field, same building, same stupid industry events I'd heard about 100 times. I remember him mentioning her once or twice. Not in any significant way, just in passing. I didn't even think to pay attention. She was just another name in a long list of coworkers I didn't know, couldn't keep track of. But seeing her now, reading her words, reading his words back to her, there was no room left for misunderstanding. She'd send selfies in office bathrooms, outfits that walked the line between professional and provocative, followed by texts like, "Wish you were in this meeting to distract me," or, "Your hands would look better on me than this blouse." He'd reply with pictures of his lunch, of his hotel rooms when he traveled, of himself shirtless in bed with captions like, "Wishing it was you here instead." I scrolled and scrolled, unable to stop even when it physically hurt. The screen was filled with timestamped receipts of a world I hadn't known existed, one that overlapped with mine, running parallel to our life like a shadow I never noticed. The worst were the messages about me. It wasn't just that he was cheating. It was that he used me as a prop in the story he was telling her. There were texts where he called me dull, said I was too career-focused, said I'd let go of myself. That last one hit me so hard I thought I'd stop breathing. Let go of myself. The woman who worked 2 jobs to help pay off the massive student debt he came into our marriage with. The woman who cooked, cleaned, planned every holiday, managed every schedule, remembered every birthday. The woman who took unpaid leave when his mother had her surgery so I could stay by her side while he flew out for a sales conference with Tessa. Let go of myself. I'd stretched myself thin for this man. I'd cut back on hair appointments, on clothes, on time with my friends, so we could afford to get ahead. I picked up freelance work on weekends, managed budgets, skipped vacations, not because I stopped caring, but because I was carrying more than just myself. I carried our life. I carried him. And in return, he made me the villain in his affair. He painted me as some cold, overworked nag who didn't appreciate him. Who didn't see him. That phrase came up more than once. She doesn't see me. As if I hadn't spent the last 5 years seeing nothing but him. I should have cried. I should have screamed. I should have thrown something, smashed something, done anything to make the crushing pressure in my chest feel real, feel physical, feel like something I could release. But I didn't. I didn't cry. I didn't fall apart. Something inside me snapped, quietly, cleanly. Like a thread that finally reached the end of its give. I looked at the phone one last time, screen still lit with the evidence, and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. I looked calm. Too calm. My face was still, my hands weren't shaking, and I realized in that moment that this wasn't grief. It was strategy. I wasn't going to fall to my knees begging for answers. I wasn't going to scream at him or give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was done playing the part of the loving, devoted wife to a man who treated me like an afterthought when my back was turned. Every part of me that used to hope he'd come back, apologize, admit he was lost and fix it, all of that was gone. There was no salvaging what I saw in those messages. You don't come back from calling your wife a burden. You don't write, her body used to be nice, but she doesn't make time for herself anymore, and expect forgiveness. Especially not when the reason I didn't make time for myself was because I was working overtime to pay off your debt. I had spent years believing in a version of him that he didn't even try to live up to. And for what? So he could sneak around with a 24-year-old assistant who thought being desired was the same thing as being valued? No. He could have her. He could have her texts, her photos, her jokes about how I was probably too busy checking emails to notice anything. I noticed every goddamn thing. I noticed the way his eyes drifted when I spoke. I noticed the way he stopped kissing me good morning. I noticed how fast he flipped his phone when I walked by. I noticed how he stopped laughing at my jokes, how he stopped asking about my day, how he looked more alive when he got back from work than when he left. It wasn't just that he cheated. It was that he lied to me in layers, one over another, until the man I thought I married was buried under a pile of selfish choices dressed up as excuses. And while he was out building a fantasy with someone else, I was at home holding together the reality he left behind. So I got tactical. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't even tell him I knew. I waited. I made dinner with him. I laughed when he told me a joke. I kissed him goodnight. But inside, something colder than anger was settling in. I was calculating. Not how to win him back. Not how to make him regret it. I was calculating how to reclaim what was mine, how to dismantle the life he built with my labor, my time, my loyalty, and do it in a way that left no room for denial, no crack for him to slither through with another excuse. Because the second he handed his heart to another woman and his lies to my face, he stopped being my husband. And I stopped being his safe place. I sat on the couch with the weight of Ryan's phone still fresh in my hand and the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth. The house felt colder somehow, despite the warmth of the oven still filling the air. He was humming in the kitchen, his usual off-key rendition of some 80s song he always butchered. Flipping chicken in a pan like this was just another night. Like he wasn't a man who had just been caught mid-performance in a play I never agreed to be in. I didn't look at him. I stared at the phone in my lap, still open to the message thread with Tessa. I scrolled up through her responses, soft, breathy little texts, hearts and exclamation points, the kind of things I used to send him when we were younger and I still believed he only wanted me. One message caught my eye again, one she'd sent earlier in the week. Last time was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. I blinked slowly, my mouth pressed into a line, then I did something that felt both terrifying and completely necessary. I typed a message back to her, mimicking his tone, his casual recklessness, his eagerness. Come over tonight. My wife's out. Doors unlocked. My thumb hovered for a second, then I hit send. The message disappeared into the ether and a second later, the little dots appeared. She was typing. She didn't hesitate. She didn't second guess. She replied instantly. Seriously? Yes. I'll be there in an hour. Can't wait. I read that sentence over and over. Can't wait. I imagined her choosing what to wear. Checking her makeup in the rearview mirror. Walking up to my house with her little smirk and her cheap perfume and thinking she'd won. I locked the phone, set it face down exactly where I found it, and took a deep breath. My face was a mask, calm, composed, hollowed out from the inside, but polished smooth on the outside. I stood up and walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened. He turned around and smiled at me, holding a wooden spoon like it was some kind of baton in a game he thought he was still winning. Dinner's almost ready, he said, voice light, maybe even a little smug. Long day? I nodded, offered a small smile, and leaned against the counter. Yeah, but this smells amazing. Thanks for cooking. It was surreal, standing there exchanging pleasantries with a man who had no idea he was walking into his own reckoning. He kissed my cheek. I forced myself not to flinch. We sat down at the table and he talked about work like he always did, client meetings, quotas, some annoying guy in his department who didn't pull his weight. I chewed my food, nodded in the right places, made soft noises of agreement. I asked a few questions to keep him at ease, to keep the illusion intact. I even laughed once, sharp and quick, and he looked so relaxed, like a man who thought the worst thing in his day was an overcooked chicken breast. I kept imagining her in her apartment, brushing her hair, fixing her lipstick, slipping on shoes she thought he'd like. I kept chewing. After dinner, I cleared the plates and rinsed them slowly, methodically. He stood behind me for a second, arms wrapped around my waist, his chin against my shoulder, and said, "Thanks for not being mad about work lately. I know I've been distracted." I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn around and smash the plate in his hand against the floor, to shove the truth down his throat until he choked on it. But instead, I leaned into his embrace and said, "It's okay. I get it. We've both been busy." That was the truth, in its own sick way. I had been busy. Just not in the way he imagined. A little later, as we were settling in for the night, I stood by the front door and grabbed my coat. "I'm going to my sister's," I said, casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "She's having a rough night and asked me to come hang out." He looked up from the couch, where he was scrolling through some mindless news app, and nodded. "Yeah, of course. Tell her I said hi. Drive safe." He didn't even offer to walk me out. Just went right back to whatever headline he was pretending to care about. He was relieved. He didn't know I was watching his reaction with the precision of a scalpel. He didn't know I could hear the subtle shift in his tone, the way his shoulders loosened, the way his eyes flicked briefly to his phone before returning to his blank screen. He didn't know that I already knew everything. That the woman who'd spent 5 years building a life with him had been replaced, in that moment, with someone far more dangerous, someone who had seen behind the curtain, and wasn't going to look away again. I walked out of the house slowly, deliberately, pulled the door shut behind me, and stood in the driveway for a few seconds, taking in the cold air, the sound of leaves rustling, the distant hum of a neighbor's television. Then I walked down the street, turned the corner, and doubled back on foot. I had already picked the spot earlier, a space between our neighbor's hedges and the side of our house, where the porch light didn't quite reach, but where I had a clear line of sight to the front door and the living room window. I crouched there, waiting, my breath fogging in the crisp evening air. The minutes crawled by. I watched as the lights inside flickered, kitchen, hallway, then just the living room glowing warm behind the blinds. I could see his silhouette pass back and forth a couple of times. He was changing. Probably freshening up. Probably spraying that cologne I bought him last Christmas. The irony almost made me laugh. Then, like clockwork, headlights rolled into the driveway. A compact silver sedan. Tessa. Right on time. She stepped out of the car in boots with heels too high for November and a coat that was more for style than warmth. She walked quickly, confidently, straight up to the front door, and didn't even knock. She just let herself in. The door wasn't locked. Because why would it be? I stayed where I was, hidden in the shadows, wrapped in silence, watching the pieces move exactly as I'd arranged them. The house that had once been my sanctuary now stood as a stage for his humiliation. And for once, I wasn't the one who'd be blindsided. I wasn't the fool, or the faithful wife, or the one left cleaning up the wreckage. This time, I was the one who knew. I was the one who planned. And I was done pretending. At exactly 6:55 p.m., I slipped back into the house through the side door, the one that led in from the narrow path between our house and the neighbor's fence. I'd left it unlocked earlier when I walked out, knowing I'd return before he even had the chance to think twice. The door creaked just slightly as I eased it open, and I paused for a beat, listening. The house was quiet, but not in the way it usually was. It was softer, more deliberate. There was a low hum of music playing somewhere, something instrumental and romantic, the kind of background noise you'd hear in a hotel bar or an overpriced spa. Then I caught the scent of candles. Candles. He had lit candles. Ryan never lit candles for me. In 5 years of marriage, not once had I walked into a room he prepared with mood lighting and soft music and something flickering warmly in the corner to set the tone. It wasn't his style. He always said candles were overkill. But here they were, 3 of them glowing from the kitchen island, another on the coffee table. My eyes adjusted quickly to the dimness, and I took quiet steps, soundless on the hardwood, past the laundry room, into the hallway where I could see the corner of the living room. He'd changed clothes. I could see the back of his head from where I stood. His shirt was ironed, tucked in neatly, probably the one he kept aside for presentations and office events. His sleeves were rolled just enough to show his forearms, a look I knew he used when he wanted to appear effortless. He was pacing slightly, checking his phone, then looking toward the front windows, nervous but excited. The lights were low enough to blur the edges of the room, but I could still make out the details. There were 2 wine glasses on the table. He'd opened the red I'd been saving for a special occasion. I had to press my hand against the wall for a moment to keep myself steady. At exactly 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. He didn't hesitate. He moved quickly to the door, checked himself once in the hallway mirror, and opened it. I moved a step closer, staying tucked behind the corner, my breath low and measured. Tessa stepped inside like she owned the place. She was wearing a tight dress, black, short, the kind of thing you wear when you think you're about to play a starring role in someone's secret fantasy. Her heels clicked softly against the tile entryway, and I watched as she leaned in and kissed him. Not on the cheek. Not a hesitant peck. A full, slow kiss, one that made his hands immediately settle at her waist like it was a routine they'd practiced more than once. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it show. I took one more breath and stepped forward. Hope you weren't expecting me to be gone that long. My voice cut through the air like a blade. Calm. Even. Measured. They froze instantly. The kiss broke mid-motion. Tessa pulled back so quickly it looked like someone had yanked her by invisible strings. Ryan turned, his expression shifting from dazed contentment to sheer panic in less than a second. His mouth opened but nothing came out. For a moment, all I heard was the soft hum of the music and the gentle hiss of the candle wick on the table. Tessa's eyes darted to me, then to Ryan, then back again. Her lip was still slightly wet from the kiss, and she wiped it without realizing. She was trying to understand what was happening. I stepped into the center of the room, letting the light catch my face fully. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at them, at both of them, and waited. Ryan's face was pale, lips parted, shoulders tense. He started to say something, then stopped, then tried again. Amber. I thought you said you were going to your... My sister's? I interrupted, tilting my head just slightly. Yeah, that's what I told you. Just like you told Tessa the door would be unlocked. I glanced at her. Right? She blinked. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. She was standing there in my hallway, in my home, wearing perfume I didn't recognize, with my husband's cologne clinging to her. She looked younger in the dim light, suddenly smaller, unsure of herself now that the fantasy had been pierced wide open. Ryan stepped forward like he thought he could still control the moment. Amber, this isn't... No, I said, holding up one hand. Stop. Just stop. You don't get to explain. Not here. Not now. I could see him swallow hard, the muscles in his jaw tightening. His breath was shallow, his confidence shattered, and yet somewhere in his expression was still the stupid belief that this could somehow be salvaged. That I would hear him out. That I'd fall apart, or scream, or cry, or plead. But I didn't. I just stood there, calm, centered, letting the moment stretch. You lit candles, I said after a beat, almost to myself. You never did that for me. Not once. His eyes flicked to the coffee table, then to the wine. He was unraveling fast. I'm going to make this very simple, I said, finally looking directly at Tessa. You have 60 seconds to get out of my house. I don't care what you thought this was. But you're not welcome here. She blinked at me, and I saw something in her eyes flicker, shame, maybe, or the dawning realization that she was not in control, not admired, not protected. Just used. She grabbed her purse from the table without a word, stepped into her shoes, and walked toward the door. When she opened it, I caught the scent of her perfume again, floral, overly sweet, nothing like what should have lingered in my home. She didn't look back. She closed the door behind her. And then it was just me and him. Ryan stood completely frozen in place, like if he didn't move, the moment would somehow collapse around him and spare him the consequences. His lips parted slightly, eyes wide, fixed on me with a look that tried to read whether I was bluffing, unraveling, or already gone. Tessa, on the other hand, stumbled back a full step like she just realized she was standing in the middle of traffic, confused and embarrassed, her face flushing deeper by the second. Her heels caught awkwardly on the rug by the entryway, and she reached for the wall for balance, blinking rapidly as if trying to make sense of what was happening, but I gave her no time. I held up his phone in my hand. I'd taken it from the couch on my way in. My thumb was already resting on the screen, open to the thread they thought I'd never see again. The room was painfully quiet, save for the low, insipid background music and the soft flicker of those idiotic candles. I looked directly at him, then down at the screen, and began to read. March 17th. You said, I can't stop thinking about the way your dress slipped off your shoulders. She never looks at me like you do. I paused and looked up. His face twitched slightly, throat moving as he swallowed, but he still didn't speak. April 8th. You told her, she's too focused on work to notice anything. It's like I'm invisible in my own house. May 2nd. I wish I could fall asleep next to you every night. When I'm with you, it feels like the world finally makes sense. Tessa opened her mouth. I didn't know, he said you two were basically over, that you were living like roommates. Her voice cracked midway through the sentence, and it sounded like someone trying to rewrite history while the ink was still wet. He said you weren't intimate anymore, he said you didn't care. I turned to her, calm, not raising my voice. And you believed that? You thought it was normal for a married man to invite you into his house, lie to his wife, and use her bed, and your first instinct wasn't to walk away, but to undress? You didn't know? No, you didn't care. She looked down, arms crossed over her chest, no longer trying to make eye contact, trying to disappear right where she stood. Ryan took a step forward. Amber, let me just talk to you. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just a single breath of disbelief that I couldn't suppress. It's exactly what it looks like, I said. And more. Because I know more than what's on this phone. I know about the hotel in Bend. June 11th. You said you were at a product demo, but your calendar had nothing. I found the receipt. I know about the night you came home late in July and said your flight was delayed, except the airline had no record of it. You lied about staying at the Sheraton. You were with her. He flinched. Tessa turned to look at him sharply. You said that was work. That you had to. He cut her off, eyes still locked on me. Amber, just listen. I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. I didn't know how to talk to you about what I was feeling. I felt like we were drifting, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I stared at him, my voice completely flat. So instead of talking to me, your wife, the woman who worked 2 jobs to get us out of debt, who handled every detail of our life, you talked to her. You slept with her. You erased me from your world, then made me the problem to justify your cowardice. I didn't mean to. You did, I cut in. You meant every text. Every night you stayed out. Every lie you rehearsed before walking through that door. You meant to cheat. You just didn't mean to get caught. He stepped forward again, reaching out now, his face a mixture of desperation and disbelief, like he was watching something collapse that he hadn't expected to fall so hard or so fast. Please. Amber. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. This isn't the end. I love you. I backed away before his hand could touch mine. You don't love me, I said, staring directly into his eyes. You loved what I did for you. You loved the safety I gave you, the home I made, the way I made your life easier, cleaner, respectable. You loved the image. But if you had loved me, even once, this wouldn't have happened. Behind him, Tessa was grabbing her purse again, fumbling with the strap, her mouth a thin line. She turned, didn't say another word, and walked to the door. Her heels clicked faster this time, uneven and shaky. She left without looking back. The door closed quietly behind her. And then it was just him and me. He stood there in the middle of the living room with the candles still flickering, the wine glasses untouched, and everything he had tried to construct around his life crumbling like sand underwater. His shoulders slumped now, like he knew. Really knew. That the performance was over. I don't have anything else to say, I whispered, my voice barely above silence. And I'm done listening. He opened his mouth, one last time. But I was already walking away. I walked straight past him, past the dim glow of those candles, past the couch we picked out together 2 years ago at a warehouse sale, past the framed photos of vacations that now felt like someone else's memories. My footsteps were calm, slow, purposeful. He followed me, his voice cracking behind me, desperate now, unraveling in real time. Amber, please. Just talk to me. Don't do this like it's over. It doesn't have to end like this. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, I'll block her, I'll do anything. Just don't leave like this. Please. But I didn't pause. I didn't respond. I went into our bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the overnight bag I always kept tucked on the top shelf. I unzipped it and started folding clothes with the same care I gave to packing for weekend trips, except this time there was no excitement, no checklist, no planning. Just movement. Just silence and fabric and a wide, endless space opening up between the two of us. He stood in the doorway, arms limp at his sides, like he didn't know whether to come closer or fall to the floor. His eyes were wet, red, his voice hoarse from saying the same things in different ways. Begging. Pleading. Bargaining. But none of it mattered now. His tears didn't undo what he'd done. His apologies didn't erase the images burned into my mind. His promises were worthless currency in a relationship he'd already bankrupted. I'll make it right, he said again, voice barely audible. I'll do whatever it takes. I zipped the bag shut. You don't get to fix this, I said, turning to face him, finally meeting his eyes. 3 months of betrayal isn't a mistake. It's a pattern. A choice you made over and over again. You looked me in the face every day while you were doing it. You lied while I cooked dinner, while I folded your clothes, while I asked how your day was. And you had every opportunity to stop, to confess, to come clean. But you didn't. Because you didn't want to. He took a step forward. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you. No, I said, my voice steady, cold. You didn't want to lose what you had with me. You wanted both. You wanted the safety of our marriage and the thrill of someone new. And you gambled that I'd never find out. You didn't expect this version of me. You thought I'd cry. You thought I'd scream. You thought I'd beg you to choose me. But I'm not doing any of that. He reached for me, and I stepped back. I'm done, I said, louder this time, with finality. You chose her. You chose lies. You chose secrecy. You chose your ego. And I choose me. I walked past him, bag slung over my shoulder, brushing by his outstretched hand like it wasn't even there. I moved through the house that had once been a home and now felt like a shell of a life, every corner stained by what he'd done. At the door, I turned one last time, not out of sentiment, but to look at the full picture one final time. He was standing there, in the center of everything he had destroyed, his shirt wrinkled now, face crumpled with regret, surrounded by flickering candles and untouched wine, the cheap perfume of another woman still lingering in the air. And for the first time, he looked small. Not just guilty. Not just afraid. Small. I opened the door and stepped into the night. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I walked away with every ounce of dignity he thought I would never have. Megan opened the door before I could even knock, like she'd been standing on the other side waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me, then at the overnight bag in my hand, then back at my face. Her eyes softened, and she pulled me into a hug, one that lasted longer than it needed to, but not a second longer than I needed it to. She didn't ask any questions right away. She didn't pry. She just let me come in, led me to the couch, and offered the kind of silence that says, I've got you, without a single word. It wasn't until the next morning, after I'd spent the night staring at her ceiling in the spare room, sleepless, exhausted, but not broken, that she brought me coffee. I was sitting at the kitchen table in an oversized hoodie she'd loaned me, the one I used to tease her about in college. She placed the mug in front of me, then sat across from me, elbows on the table, chin resting in her hands. Her hair was messy, and she looked like she hadn't even brushed it, but I was grateful for the familiarity of it all. The normalcy. The safety. I took a sip. The coffee was too strong, just how I liked it. Then I told her everything. I didn't filter it. I didn't sugarcoat it. I walked her through every detail, every message I had read, every lie I had heard fall from Ryan's mouth, every night I'd lain next to a man who had been cheating with a 24-year-old while pretending to be tired from work. I told her about the candles. The wine. The smug look on his face before he opened the door to Tessa. The look that shattered when I stepped out from the shadows. I told her about the bag I packed while he begged. The way I zipped it calmly, ignored the tears he thought might move me. I told her how I walked away without a single word wasted, how I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't give him the spectacle he probably expected. I told her everything, because I needed someone to hear it who wouldn't doubt me, who wouldn't try to rationalize his behavior or ask if I'd done something to push him away. Megan never did that. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't shift uncomfortably or make sympathetic noises. She just stayed still, her eyes fixed on mine, unwavering. When I finished, when the room fell into that soft hush again, she leaned back in her chair, exhaled through her nose, and said simply, "Good for you." That was it. No pity. No condolences. Just those 3 words. And somehow, they hit harder than anything else anyone could have said. Good for you. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a declaration. A kind of affirmation I didn't know I needed. Because for so long I had associated walking away with failure. I thought that ending a marriage, no matter how broken it was, meant I hadn't tried hard enough. I had been so conditioned to believe that silence was strength, that forgiveness was noble, that staying, even when staying meant losing yourself, was the higher road. But in that moment, with those 3 words, I realized I had never been stronger. Leaving wasn't weakness. Refusing to be humiliated wasn't weakness. Not falling apart while watching everything I had built disintegrate in front of me, that wasn't weakness. That was power. That was clarity. That was me choosing myself, not as an act of spite or revenge, but as a final act of respect for the woman I had been all along, the one who showed up, who held the house together, who carried the weight of a marriage that he treated like a convenience. I wrapped both hands around the mug and nodded, mostly to myself. I hadn't cried since the night before. Not in the car. Not in Megan's spare room. Not over coffee. And I knew then that I wasn't going to. I didn't need to shed another tear for a man who never once deserved the life I gave him. I didn't owe him my grief. I owed myself closure, and that wasn't going to come from him. After breakfast, I walked into the guest room, grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and searched for divorce attorneys near me. I found 3 with strong reviews and called the one whose assistant sounded the most competent. I didn't stumble over my words. I didn't choke up. I scheduled a consultation for the next afternoon, saved the address in my calendar, and ended the call without hesitation. That was the moment it became real. Not just the end of a marriage, but the beginning of something else entirely. Not freedom in the poetic sense. Not some dramatic rebirth. Just action. Just steps, forward and deliberate. The sound of my own voice giving instructions again. The weight of my decision becoming lighter with every breath. I didn't need to know where the path would lead. All I knew was that I had finally stepped onto it. Vanessa didn't waste time with small talk. From the moment I stepped into her office, she was already flipping through a legal pad filled with notes, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, her red pen moving with precision. She was sharp, efficient, and radiated a kind of controlled energy that made it instantly clear she was not someone to be underestimated. The air in her office was cool and clinical, her desk spotless except for the neatly stacked folders, the kind of environment where emotion didn't stand a chance next to facts. That suited me just fine. I handed her a flash drive, a printed binder, and an envelope filled with physical copies of everything I had collected. Screenshots of text messages, call logs pulled from our shared phone plan, photos, date-stamped receipts, hotel invoices, dinner bills, and even a calendar snapshot where Ryan had claimed to be on a business trip that didn't exist. It was all neatly labeled, color-coded, and cross-referenced. I had spent the 2 days before our meeting combing through every detail, building a timeline, connecting dots, confirming what I already knew. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, sustained affair. Vanessa flipped through the binder while I spoke, occasionally nodding, occasionally scribbling something in the margin. She didn't react much until she got to a section of messages where Ryan had insulted me to Tessa, called me boring, said I'd let myself go, accused me of being cold and distant. She read those lines slowly, then looked up at me with a kind of professional disgust. This isn't just adultery, she said flatly. This is character assassination. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The facts were already speaking louder than my voice ever could. When Ryan's lawyer reached out, they offered the most predictable package possible, a clean 50-50 split. Equal division of the savings, shared rights to the house, and no mention of fault. It was textbook, an offer meant to keep things quiet, quick, painless. Vanessa didn't even blink before she pushed the proposal aside like it was junk mail. He doesn't get to walk away clean, she said. Not after this. She filed the response with surgical precision. I was seeking primary ownership of the house, a greater portion of our joint savings, and, most importantly, a formal admission of marital misconduct to be entered into the public court record. I didn't want a quiet settlement. I wanted accountability. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the truth mattered. He had dismantled our life piece by piece behind my back, and now he could answer for it in broad daylight. When Ryan found out what I was asking for, he called me. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded panicked. Amber, come on, this doesn't have to get ugly. Can we just talk about this, please? You don't need to take everything. He was wrong. I wasn't taking everything. I was taking what I had built. I was taking back what he had no right to anymore. I was claiming the pieces of a life I'd poured years into while he poured himself into someone else. His lawyer pushed back, tried to argue that infidelity didn't carry legal weight in Oregon's no-fault system. Vanessa didn't flinch. She adjusted the strategy, shifted focus to financial fairness, emotional duress, character evidence. She laid it out so cleanly, so irrefutably, that they had no choice but to yield. They offered a revised agreement, still trying to negotiate terms that would lessen the blow. Vanessa rejected it again. 3 weeks into negotiations, Ryan caved. I got the house. I got 65% of our joint savings. I got a written acknowledgement, voluntarily signed and notarized, that Ryan had engaged in an extramarital affair which had caused irreparable harm to the marriage. Vanessa had it entered into the record within the hour. It didn't change the legal outcome, but it mattered. I wanted it on paper. I wanted it in black and white. I wanted the truth to be louder than any lie he had told. The day the settlement was finalized, Ryan sent me one last message. It was short. Just 2 sentences. I never thought you'd actually do it. You really don't care anymore, do you? He was right. I didn't. I had cared for so long, so fiercely, so blindly, with so much of myself, that there was nothing left to offer him now. He stood there in the wreckage of his own making, stripped of the life he'd taken for granted, the home he thought he'd always have, the woman he thought would never walk away. Tessa, from what I heard, had ghosted him entirely. Deleted her social media. Stopped showing up at the office. Left without a trace once she realized there was no fantasy left to chase. Karma didn't come with drama. It didn't need fire or screaming or closure wrapped in a bow. It came quietly. It came when I walked into that courtroom and left with everything he thought I wouldn't fight for. It came when I didn't scream at him, didn't argue, didn't let him twist the narrative one last time. It came when I stood up for myself and didn't look back. The first thing I did after the divorce was finalized wasn't to celebrate, it was to reclaim my space. The house no longer felt like a battlefield or a memory museum. It felt like potential. So I started there. I repainted every wall. I went with warm tones in the living room, rich ochres and soft creams that caught the morning light just right, and deep navy in the bedroom, a shade that made me feel cocooned, safe, grounded. I replaced the old furniture, especially the couch we used to share, the one where I'd once sat pretending not to notice his phone lighting up in secret. That couch was the first thing to go. I picked out new pieces that felt like me, sturdy, clean lines, soft textures, bold colors I would have been too cautious to choose before. The process wasn't rushed. I took my time. I'd spend hours walking through home stores, running my fingers over fabrics, testing out lamps, sitting in armchairs just to feel the weight of them. It was all deliberate. Every shelf, every photo I chose to reframe, every object I discarded or kept, it was all part of the slow, steady act of building something new. Not for us. Not for a couple. Just for me. Somewhere in the middle of it, I adopted a cat. Milo. He was a lanky gray tabby with white paws and a cautious nature, the kind of animal that didn't trust easily. The first few days he mostly stayed under the couch, peeking out at me like he wasn't sure what I was going to do. I understood that feeling all too well. We eased into it together. Eventually, he began to follow me from room to room, curling up next to me when I read, nuzzling my face when I cried, pawing at my hand when I spent too long staring blankly at nothing. He didn't ask for much. Just consistency. Kindness. A little space. That felt manageable. I reached out to people I hadn't seen in years, friends I'd drifted from because I was too busy working, too busy being a wife, too busy covering for someone who never even noticed what it was costing me. To my surprise, they were still there. They met me for coffee, invited me to dinners, pulled me back into circles I thought I'd aged out of. I remembered what it felt like to laugh without bitterness lodged in my throat, to talk for hours and not once feel like I was being judged or measured. Therapy came next. A quiet office with a woman named Elise who never looked surprised by anything I said. At first, I didn't know what to talk about. I kept waiting for the part where I'd break down, but it didn't come the way I expected. Instead, what came out were realizations, slow and steady. The ways I'd minimized myself. The way I'd turned exhaustion into a personality trait. How I had convinced myself that loyalty meant silence. Elise didn't tell me how to feel. She just asked the right questions until the answers felt obvious. And then, one weekend, I joined a hiking group. It wasn't something I ever imagined doing before. Ryan never liked hiking. Said it was boring, too much effort for not enough reward. But I had always wanted to try it. I found the group online, signed up for a beginner trail, and showed up not knowing anyone. The first hour was hard. My legs burned, my breath came short, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But then I reached the top of the hill, and the view opened up like something out of a painting. I stood there, flushed and sweating, heart pounding, and felt quiet. Not empty. Not sad. Just still. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who I was before I twisted myself into something small to fit into someone else's version of love. I was rediscovering the parts of myself I hadn't touched in years, the part that liked early mornings, that danced in the kitchen, that made playlists for no reason, that wore lipstick just because it made me feel bold. Meanwhile, Ryan unraveled. I heard through a mutual acquaintance, one of those friends you never unfollow on social media even after everything, that he lost his job a few weeks after the divorce papers were signed. Something about poor performance, missed quotas, slipping focus. I imagined the chaos behind his calm facade finally catching up to him. Tessa was long gone. She hadn't answered any of his calls after the fallout, and from what I could tell, she'd moved to another city entirely. He couldn't keep the apartment on his own. Eventually, he moved back in with his parents. He tried to reach out to me once. A message on a platform I hadn't used in months. Just one sentence, "Can we talk?" I didn't even open it. I didn't need to. I blocked the account without hesitation. There was nothing left to say. Closure doesn't come in some grand conversation or perfect ending. It comes quietly, in 100 small decisions. In repainting a wall. In buying the food you like. In dancing barefoot to a song that used to make you cry. In a cat curling up on your chest. In the moment you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. And I was. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, months after everything had already ended. The kind of quiet, ordinary day where I had been fully present in my own life, working from my favorite coffee shop, planning a weekend trip with friends, coming home to find Milo curled in a patch of sunlight by the window. I had no expectations of anything out of the ordinary, no lingering thoughts about him, no need to revisit the past. And then I saw the notification, one new email, a name I hadn't seen in ages, staring back at me from the screen like a ghost I'd long since buried. Ryan. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't stutter. There was no jolt of panic, no sudden rush of heat to my face like there might have been months ago. Instead, I just stared at it for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly, not because I was uncertain, but because I already knew what was inside without opening it. I could practically hear the voice in my head, the one that always started off quiet and self-pitying, desperate to control the narrative one last time. The subject line was simple. No capitalization. No punctuation. Just, can we talk? I clicked once, just enough to read the preview, and that was all I needed. He had written a few paragraphs. Enough to fill the preview window with half-sentences and wandering thoughts. Apologies, vague references to everything that happened, acknowledgements of how I hurt you, followed by the inevitable pivot to himself. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking. That he missed me. That he regretted everything. That he didn't know how to fix it, but he hoped maybe someday I'd understand. There was a line about how lonely he felt. About how he didn't realize what he had until it was gone. He used words like mistake, confused, broken. He used my name more than once, like he thought it might pull me back in. But what stood out the most was how carefully he avoided the truth. The real truth. There was no mention of Tessa by name. No mention of the nights he'd lied to my face or the things he'd said behind my back. No reference to the candles or the wine or the way he had welcomed her into my home with open arms while I walked away from a life I had built with everything I had. It wasn't an apology. It was a rewrite. A carefully crafted attempt to smooth over the jagged edges, to make himself seem softer, more human, less cruel. And maybe once, I would have read it all. Maybe I would have picked apart every sentence, searching for sincerity, for remorse, for a sign that the man I once loved still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage. Maybe I would have drafted a response. Not to forgive, but to release the last word from my chest, to speak my version of the story out loud. Maybe. But not now. Now, I just stared at the screen for another second, hovering over the message. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just clarity. Complete, unwavering clarity. I clicked delete. No response. No engagement. No reaction. He didn't deserve even that. There was no closure to be found in a message from a man who had already said everything he needed to say with his actions. The truth wasn't in his words, it was in the silence he kept for months while I packed up our life alone. It was in the way he reached for someone else instead of reaching for me. It was in the way he looked at her like I never existed. There was no misunderstanding. There was no gray area. Just choices. And consequences. And I had chosen myself. I closed the laptop, stood up, and moved on with the rest of my day. My life had taken on its own rhythm now, steady, honest, mine. I had a home that felt like a sanctuary, friendships that felt like family, a growing sense of peace that no apology could rattle. I didn't need the last word. I already had it. It was everything I didn't say. It was a quiet Sunday in late spring, exactly 1 year to the day since I'd stood in the shadows of my own home and watched my husband kiss another woman. A year since the illusion shattered. A year since the version of me that would have forgiven, compromised, or waited in silence had died for good. I didn't mark the date on a calendar. I didn't plan anything elaborate. But when I woke up that morning, there was a kind of stillness in my chest that hadn't been there before. A calm, settled feeling. And I knew what I wanted to do. I walked into the garage and found the box. It was exactly where I'd left it, tucked into the corner behind some camping gear and a set of string lights I'd never gotten around to hanging. It was dusty, a little dented at the corners, and heavier than I remembered, not because of the weight of the contents, but because of everything it symbolized. I didn't open it right away. I carried it carefully to the car, set it in the trunk, and started driving. I knew the place instinctively. A clearing off a quiet forest road about an hour outside the city, tucked behind a ridge where the trees parted just enough to let the sky breathe through. Megan and I had hiked past it once, and I remembered thinking, this would be a perfect place to let something go. When I parked, the wind was low, the sun warm on my arms, and the only sound was the soft rustle of leaves. It didn't feel dramatic. It didn't feel symbolic. It just felt right. I set the box down in the center of the clearing and opened the lid slowly, letting the musty scent of paper and fabric rise into the air. The wedding dress was on top, still folded in tissue, its ivory silk now dulled slightly with time. I pulled it out and held it for a moment. It looked smaller than I remembered. Fragile, even. The last time I'd touched it, I'd been full of hope, standing in front of a mirror, imagining a future that never had a chance to exist. Beneath it were the photos, smiling faces, post moments, perfectly framed lies. Our first dance. The kiss. The cake cutting. A life that never truly belonged to me, no matter how much I had given to it. I laid it all out gently, piece by piece. Cards with carefully written vows. The pressed flowers from my bouquet, faded and brittle. A printed wedding program with both our names in gold script. And at the very bottom, a handwritten note he'd left for me on the morning of the wedding, promising to love me, always, no matter what. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I took a breath, lit a single match, and touched the flame to the edge of the dress. The fire spread slowly at first, curling along the hem, eating through lace and ribbon with a quiet hunger. I watched it rise, orange and alive, turning fabric into smoke, turning paper into ash. The photographs curled inward, edges blackening, faces folding in on themselves like they'd never existed. The note was one of the last things to go, his handwriting disappearing letter by letter until only embers remained. I stood back as the smoke lifted, swirling into the air, weightless and free. It didn't feel like destruction. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like release. Like I was returning something that had never truly been mine to the earth, to the sky, to whatever place false promises go when they've finally served their purpose. As the last of it turned to ash, I smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not bitter. Just quiet. Real. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't the woman who had sat in the dark, reading betrayal off a glowing screen. I wasn't the wife trying to piece together a future with someone who had shattered it behind her back. I wasn't defined by what he'd done to me, or what I'd endured, or how I'd survived. I was free. And this life I had built with my own two hands, on my own terms, with no one else's permission, that was the real ending. That was the sweetest revenge. Not that he lost me. But that I found myself.